I am nature, the universal mother, mistress of all the elements, primordial child of time, sovereign of all things spiritual, queen of the dead, queen of the ocean, queen also of the immortals, the single manifestation of all gods and goddesses that are. My nod governs the shining heights of heavens, the wholesome sea of breezes. Though I am worshipped in many aspects, known by countless names, the Egyptians who excel in ancient learning and worship call me by my true name, Queen Isis. And so spoke the goddess, according to Apulus in his novel The Golden Ass, written in the 2nd century CE. As all encompassing as this proclamation may sound, the goddess Isis was perceived by the Egyptians, then Greeks, and finally the Romans in different ways over much of the centuries, as she constantly evolved to suit new religious and cultural movements. In pictorial representations, the goddess Isis is typically shown as a woman wearing a vulture headdress tied upon her head. Above this headdress, Isis often wears a crown, typically a combination of a pair of horns that frame a solar disk. Now, while the horns are often the same as the cow goddess Hathor, she sometimes has the horns of a ram in connection with Osiris, who also sometimes possessed ram's horns. At times, the symbol of her name, which is shaped like a throne, surmounts the horn disc crown. In various images, for instance, in the Book of the Dead, Isis stands prominently upon the prow of Ra's day barge, with her wings outstretched as she chants her sacred words of power. She often holds an ankh, which is an amulet symbolizing life, and the Tau cross, which in shape conforms to the hieroglyphic word that means life. It also means stability. Later on, it became Saint Anthony's cross. Now, I've been in many circles, and there seems to be a big argument about the name of Isis and how to pronounce it. So often, I have given lectures, and I have been corrected by a very well-meaning person to tell me that no, this is not the way her name is said. It's said this way. And then, of course, at some other lecture, another well-meaning person will come forward and say the exact opposite or something else as a variant of it. Everybody has their idea. What I'm going to do is put the rest of that controversy of how to say her name. So for some people, it is Isis with a long I. For others, the vowel is a long A. For still others, it is a long E sound, as in meat. Of course, in Egyptian, her name was actually said as either Set, but or they will say that in some other cases, it seems that they had also said it this way, Set or Isis. However, in Greek, her name is spelled with an iota, the I, and it is a long I sound, and so that would be Isis. It could also be Isis. Is this making sense? So you do have, so you're doing the Greek way of pronouncing it. Obviously, the Egyptian ways of saying it will have a T at the end. But obviously, when it comes to the Greek way, it'll have a sigma, which is the S sound. So you have Isis. So it could be Isis, Aset, Eset. But the reason why it's so important for the Greeks to be Isis is that basically they connected her name with the Greek word oida, which means to know. And so the idea of Isis is connected to the idea that she is the one who has knowledge. So the answer to the question is, if you want to go more indigenous to Egyptian perspectives, are you following this? Then it's Aset or Eset. But if you are going to go more Hellenistic or Greek with it, it's Isis. So the answer to the question is they're all correct. We have to remember that it is the Greeks, especially during the Hellenistic age, dominated Egypt. The Ptolemies ruled Egypt ever since Alexander the Great arrived there, and they were in charge all the way to the Romans. And they were very much involved in the worship of Isis. And so their way of saying it can be just as correct as the others. Isn't that great? We've already learned something. Okay. As for the origins of the name Isis and her cult, it does go back to at least the pre-dynastic period. The first reference of Isis by name occurs during the fifth dynasty. That's basically from 2494 to 2345 BCE. This is during the Old Kingdom period. Egyptologists are divided on the original application of her name. For while Isis can mean throne in Egyptian, the question is, how does this throne, uh, how is this throne being understood? I mean, is it pertain to the idea of her as, well, let's see, like a throne mother? Or did it refer to the fact that she was the mother of one who was set on the throne? We got to remember that many African tribes attribute the designation throne as the mother of the king. So we have to understand that context. Without doubt, uh, Isis has funerary applications. The pyramid text alone, written during the time of the Old Kingdom, refers to Isis by name over 80 times. Already, the pyramid texts declare her as the great Isis. Here she is often viewed as the spouse of the deceased pharaoh, tending to him in the afterlife. In this capacity, Isis was the wife, and Horus was the husband who was also the deceased pharaoh. You heard me correctly. So it is Horus who is the husband and Isis who is the wife. So we don't have Osiris and Isis yet because we're understanding the context from the Old Kingdom. Isis is presented in the Book of the Dead as standing by the deceased as both a mourning widow and the wife of the husband now and in the underworld, declaring as follows: I come forth to protect you with the north wind, which comes forth from Tem. I have strengthened for you your throat. I have caused you to be with the God, and I have placed all of your enemies under your feet. Hmm. Yet she was also perceived as the mother of Pharaoh too, giving birth to his life here on earth, while another goddess by the name of Nephthys gave birth to him in the hereafter. In fact, one pyramid text from the reign of the pharaoh by the name of Eunice states as follows: Come, Shu, come, Shu, come, Shu, for Eunice is born on the thighs of Isis, and he has sank down upon the thighs of Nephthys, having been brought forth. In this capacity, Isis is often shown as nursing the pharaoh. And we're going to be seeing this kind of theme for a long time. Her milk giving him the magical powers to rule Egypt. Eventually, since Isis was viewed as the mother of Pharaoh, and Pharaoh was viewed as the embodiment of Horus, she then became mother of Horus as well. But this was a gradual evolution. So you have this very strange period of time where Isis is not only the mother of Pharaoh, but she's also the wife. Interesting. But don't worry, we'll track this down. Naturally, from an Old Kingdom point of view, Isis then becomes the mother of the four sons of Horus. And of the four sons of Horus, Isis becomes associated specifically with Enlil, the son who protects the liver in the Tanakhic jars. Now, Isis was affiliated with various star cults. Unfortunately, we only have some meager evidence on this. Of the stars, she, along with the goddess Satit, was connected to Sirius. I'm being serious about it. The dog star, called by the Egyptians Sothis or Set. Star of Sothis, was believed to be responsible for the inundation of the Nile River, making this association quite natural. And that Isis was also connected to the revival of the waters of this most pivotal river in Egypt. When the Egyptians saw her star, they were greatly relieved, knowing that the waters of the Nile were about to rise and bring with it rich black soil for planting. So the star of Sothis was a star of hope. The Nile is going to inundate. It's going to bring that fresh black soil from the south, and it's going to cover the lands around the Nile and give fertile, rich mud that will make agriculture so easy. All you have to do is plant, and it will grow, and you just watch it grow. You can imagine why Isis was so beloved. Of course, Plutarch notes that Sothis in Egyptian also signifies the word pregnant. So it is, in a sense, to be pregnant. So it's the impregnating of Egypt with the mud of the Nile of life. In another place, Plutarch writes, of the stars, the Egyptians think that the dog star is the star of Isis because it is the bringer of water. Meanwhile, the soul of Osiris was believed to be manifest in the star Orion, called by the Egyptians Sa, which happens to be very near to the star of Sothis. By the New Kingdom, Isis became more and more prominent with her husband Horus, then becoming her son instead. And now she receives a new husband, and that will then be Osiris. Now, the origins of Isis are explained in many ways. In the version of the creation myth from Heliopolis, the first primary god, Atum, rises as a mound upon the primordial oceans, and he generates Shu, the god of the air, and Tefnut, the goddess of water. Next, Shu and Tefnut, they copulate and produce the earth god by the name of Geb, and the sky god by the name, goddess, by the name of Nut. So you have, God, about that. Earth, goddess, and God. Reigns all over the place. Geb and Nut then had 4 children. The first child was Osiris, a god of regeneration. The second child was Isis, goddess of life and magic, and of course, rebirth. The third child was Set, god of chaos. And the fourth child was Nephthys, symbolizing the process of dying, but also protection. In a sense, while Isis represented the process of gaining life, she's the one who gives life, Nephthys was the opposite force. She represents the process of dying, yet not in a really tragic sense, in a kindly sense, acting as the nurturing nurse as life gradually passes away. The pyramid texts state it well by proclaiming, ascend and descend with Nephthys, sink into darkness with the night bark, ascend and ascend with Isis, rise with the day bark. Thus, the new octet, the 8 gods of creation, now composed of Shu, Tefnut, Gib, Nut, Osiris, Isis, Set, and Nephthys. Now, the sky goddess, Nut, was typically depicted nude and often appears with her body covering the sky, with legs and feet on the ground. So she kind of hovers there. Okay. Okay, so it does look kind of like a cow. She'll be depicted as a cow. I'm not sure if I'm doing this right with the zoom. There you go. I'm not sure if my arm should even go this way. Wait a minute. Okay, so there you have it. And then Shu, the god of the air, holds her up in the middle. So he's in the middle there. Geb, of course, Geb, is the earth that lays beneath her. So Nut or Nut, it's actually said both ways, has her headdress as a pot that most believe represents a uterus. At times, rather than a human, Nut is shown in the guise of a cow covering the heavens. You have this sacred cow symbolism that permeates in Egyptian culture, and of course, as we know, it permeates also in India as well. According to the myth of Ra and Nut, the sun god was fearful that Nut would have children because then he would have possible rivals to the throne. And so he decreed that Nut shall not give birth any day of the year. He thought that took care of the story. At that time, a year, however, only had 360 days. And so Nut was only bound to that set number of days. And so she put together an interesting plan. Got together with Thoth, the god of wisdom, to work around Ra's edict. Thoth, the god of wisdom, he noticed that Khonshu, the god of the moon, had this penchant for gambling. He also noted he wasn't very good at it. So Thoth set up a game whereby if Khonshu lost, he had to give up some light that he used to illuminate the moon. Khonshu kept on losing to Thoth, and so eventually Thoth had enough light in his possession to create 5 extra days, making for 365 days of the year. Taking advantage of this adjustment, Nut produced during these 5 days a deity each day, 5 more children, giving birth successively to Osiris, Horus, Set, Isis, and Nephthys. When Ra found out he had been tricked, he was so angry and forced Nut to stay away from Gib for all of eternity. But it was too late to undo what she had set forth. Nut's father, Shu, god of the air, was entrusted with the job of keeping those 2 lovers apart. Isis is also mentioned in another kind of book of the dead called the Amduat, which connected each hour of the day and night, and actually starts with going into the night realm, descend into the underworld. So Ra, basically, he'd be riding his day chariot, and then he would exchange for his night barge at the place of the horizon, and then go deep. And of course, you had the various hours of the night that would be tracked. The first hour of the night at the Ra is under the earth, is a time of transition. This is the time where sun descends into the western horizon. It's a period of time known as the Achet. In the second hour, Ra encounters the watery world known as Werns. This realm of water continues into the third hour, where he encounters the waters of Osiris. The fourth region of the underworld, uh, which is, of course, the fourth hour of the night, he reaches the region connected to the god Sokar, hawk deity. Ra has to navigate then a treacherous zigzag path as he is dragged upon a snake boat. In the fifth hour, the sun reaches the tomb of Osiris that is covered by a giant pyramid shaped mound. This, this pyramid shaped mound is declared as Isis over Osiris. And over the summit of the pyramid, two kites, two birds fly around, Isis and Nephthys, which of course are Egyptian birds of prey. Beneath this tomb lies the great lake of fire. Now, during the sixth hour, the soul of Ra, called in this text the Ba, unites with his body, which is the precise moment the sun begins to regenerate. So it may return to the realm above. So Isis is connected to this regenerating power. So the power, the decreasing power, which is connected to Nephthys, is then replaced with the positive power that's connected with Isis and the regeneration of the sun to bring him through the hours of the night and towards the day. And so she is very magical. She's known for her energy. And so you're going to have Ra will encounter the great serpent of old, known as Apophis. There'll be a great battle. The magic of Isis will empower him to defeat, and he'll be able to rise again. This happens every single day. It is a daily process. So Ra is considered a hero on a regular basis. The most popular myth, of course, associated with Isis is naturally the one connected with Osiris in relation to the Nile River. There's no denial about the Nile, or somewhat of that. And of course, the conflict with Seth and the birth of Horus. It is obvious then that in order to understand Isis, we must understand Horus as well as Osiris and their common foe, Seth. Without question, Horus is the oldest documented god of Egypt and starts off as a patron deity of the city of Mekhen in Upper Egypt. And they have found that there was indeed a temple dedicated to Horus, as the principal deposit found within this temple was filled with offerings from the pharaohs from both the Old and Middle Kingdoms. They were dedicated, of course, to Horus, and he was viewed as the god who permitted them with the right to rule Egypt. But Horus is also the god that is believed to possess them so that they may have the authority to do so, authority to rule. This falcon god is believed to be the god of the sky and was worshipped in the pre-dynastic period. By the time of the pyramid texts, 2400 to 2300 BCE, during the Old Kingdom, Pharaoh became viewed as both Horus and Osiris, the god of the underworld, an aspect. So the Pharaoh was understood as acting as Horus in life and Osiris in death. Once Pharaoh died, Horus was believed to incarnate as the very next Pharaoh, and so on and so forth. Now that Horus and Osiris were connected to one another through Pharaoh, the question is how they were related. So eventually, Horus became viewed as the son of Osiris and the goddess Isis. In the capacity as a child, Horus is depicted naked, sitting on a lotus with a finger in his mouth. In other representations, he is shown sitting on the lap of Isis, often suckling in a manner that's reminiscent of the Madonna and child iconography. His name not only means falcon, but also can mean distant one or one who is above or over. In addition to empowering Pharaoh, Horus as a sky god was believed to encompass both the sun and the moon, with the sun represented by his right eye and the moon represented by his left eye, with both spheres moving because, well, he empowered them to do so through his power of flight. So he is the one who moves the sun. He is the one who moves the moon. This is very important, right? And of course, also sets about the concept of night and day, which later on those ideas will be moved over primarily to Ra. Okay, this is earlier on. Now, some people wondered why his sun eye was brighter than his moon eye, and that was explained in a story related to Horus and Seth. Seth, of course, was the patron god of Lower Egypt and fought Horus, the patron god of Upper Egypt. The battle was fierce, with Seth losing a testicle and with Horus losing his left eye. As a result of Seth's loss of his testicle, the desert regions that he represented became infertile, while Horus received a replacement eye from the moon god Khonshu that was not quite as bright as the one before. So there is a constant battle going on between these two over and over again. Okay, so there's many stories that refer to the fighting between Seth and Horus, but at first, Seth is not considered bad or evil in any way. He is simply the dry regions. He represents he's connected to the red color. But eventually, Seth became the ultimate villain, especially in the story of Osiris and Isis. Now, Osiris, he was the god of the underworld, of the afterlife, and the dead, while his wife was obviously Isis, was the goddess of the realm of life, of nature, of magic. Osiris was essentially a god of the earth and vegetation who died every year during the annual drought. Meanwhile, Isis was the nature goddess who had the power, the magic to help resurrect him so he could live and thrive again as represented by the inundation of the Nile. Plutarch states, as they regard the Nile as the effusion of Osiris, so they hold and believe the earth to be the body of Isis. Not all of it, but so much of it as the Nile covers it, fertilizes it, and unites with it. In short, Osiris represents moisture. He is moisture. Um, he is, in a sense, nature's semen, right? He is understood in the male capacity, as we understand through Plutarch, who says not only the Nile, but every form of moisture they call simply the effusion of Osiris. And in their holy rites, the water jar in honor of the god heads the procession. And by the picture of a rush, they represent a king in the southern region of the world, and the rush is interpreted to mean the watering and fructifying of all things, and its nature, it seems to bear some resemblance to the generative member. Moreover, when they celebrate the festival of Pamphylia, which, as has been said, is of a phallic member, they expose and carry about a statue of which the male member is triple, for the god is the source, and every source, by its fecundity, it multiplies what proceeds from it, And for many times, we have a habit of saying thrice, as for example, thrice happy, and bonds even thrice as many unnumbered, unless indeed the word triple is used by the early writers in a strict meaning. For the nature of moisture being the source and origin of all things, created out of itself three primal material substances: earth, air, and fire. And of course, this is also three. So, to this moisture, Isis becomes the magical power that takes in this moisture and gives it the energy to make life. She is the earth that becomes impregnated by this moisture to give life, right? Osiris is sometimes depicted with green skin in connection to plants, and sometimes with black skin in connection to the rich, fertile mud of the Nile. So Plutarch notes Osiris, according to their legendary tradition, was dark because water darkens everything, earth and clothes and clouds, when it comes into contact with them. In young people, the presence of moisture renders their hair black, while grayness, like a paleness as it were, is induced by dryness in those who are passing their prime. Also, the springtime is vigorous, prolific, and agreeable. The autumn, since it lacks moisture, is inimical to plants and unhealthy for living creatures. And so you have this idea then that the Nile River, as it inundates, brings the moisture, but also the black, rich soil, and brings it down into Egypt to be magically given life by Isis. Now, of course, Osiris is very much like many of the other dying vegetative gods throughout the ancient East. Of course, Osiris has lots of connections with Dionysus, and many will see two as one when it comes to the dying and resurrecting deity. And so there'll be connections that go between the two. Um, but Osiris is first found in evidence during the Old Kingdom and is mentioned in the pyramid texts. Yet we find direct evidence of when he became more revered at a certain point. For example, there's a during the Old Kingdom, there is a formula that went as follows during the fourth dynasty. It says, an offering the king gives and Anubis. But it was changed, and by the fifth dynasty, it says, an offering the king gives and Osiris. And so Osiris becomes more important between the fourth and to the fifth dynasties. Osiris was also there to help Pharaoh in the afterlife, while according to the pyramid texts, the goddess Isis was there to help his wife or his wives. He was also associated with the growth behind vegetation, as you know. For every year that the vegetation would die, uh, through his life-giving waters of the Nile, that which was dead would be resurrected and revived. But the power of that, again, is Isis. Isis is energy. It is a life-giving energy that ignites with the moisture and the soil that is given forth by Osiris. It is very fascinating to see how complex it gets when it comes to considerations of creation. Okay, next major innovation we find in the mortuary temple of Mentuhotep, in that the pharaohs now would be directly related to Osiris, who during the 11th dynasty enters into a place of importance within more general Egyptian beliefs. Mentuhotep, he reigned from 2061 to around 2010. The pharaohs believed that through sympathetic magic, they could become Osiris themselves after death. And so, via this god of the underworld, could have the power to rise again to a new life following their death. So, by the time the new kingdom, this resurrection connected to Osiris was believed to be available to all Egyptians. So now this regenerative resurrection power of Osiris, as energized by Isis, can be given to all. We can all participate. We can all, in a sense, resurrect. A Budge notes Egyptians put their trust in Osiris himself and addressed their prayers directly to him as the being, partly divine and partly human, who raised himself from the dead without seeing corruption, and who bestowed upon his own earthly body, by means of his divine nature, the gift of everlasting life, which it enjoyed in an incorruptible and glorified form in heaven. So there you have it. For example, during the reign of Thutmose III, 1479, 1425, this pharaoh was made to say upon his tomb, "Homage to thee, O my divine father Osiris. You have your being with your members. You did not decay. You did not turn into worms. You did not rot away. You did not become corruption. You did not putrefy. I shall not decay. I shall not rot. I shall not putrefy. I shall have my being. I shall live. I shall germinate. It shall neither fall into ruin nor be destroyed off this earth." Unquote. Kind of a powerful way of taking the ideas of Osiris and then bringing it on upon himself. At the time of Plutarch, in the first into the second century CE, many Greek philosophers asserted that the name Osiris was connected to the word Osion, meaning holy, or Herion, meaning sacred. Many, so there you have it. There. Now, let's get into the stories. All right, here we go. So many Egyptians, here we are, we're now telling the classic story of Osiris and Isis. But what we're going to do is learn about Isis as we tell the story. Egyptians tell the story of how Osiris, who was the son of Abib, was very unhappy about his rule on earth, about the brutal habits of the people that he was governing. In fact, he wasn't sure if they were even worthy of taking on the throne. One of the practices that was abhorrent to Osiris was cannibalism. That's right. So he set out to teach them how to sow seeds and harvest the yields, along with giving them laws to organize their societies. Thoth, the god of wisdom, went along with him. And so Osiris was understood to be a kind king, but he wished others to learn to be able to feed themselves in a healthy manner, especially spreading the idea of agriculture as he journeyed out of Egypt, spreading the news everywhere about. Well, he left his wife and queen, Isis, at home. At this point, Seth enters into the picture and forms a plot to both have Isis as his wife, as well as gaining the land of Egypt from her husband. Now, according to the Greeks, Seth was named Typhon because he was so often puffed up with pride and conceited, but he was also ignorant and very self-deceptive. So he's known to tear to pieces and scatter to the winds the sacred writings which the goddess collects and puts together and gives into the keeping of those that are initiated into the holy rites. So he has now become this deity of chaos. Plutarch, of course, understands Isis as connected to knowledge and understanding. But Seth is the opposite force, moving one towards chaos and destruction. In fact, Plutarch declares as follows that she is an animate, an intelligent movement. But of course, Typhon is the opposite. And sometimes the Greeks will connect Isis with Athena to that connection with wisdom. So when Osiris returned in the 28th year of his reign, Seth and 72 other conspirators were able to throw Osiris into a coffin. And he's then murdered, and his body is thrown into the Nile. There's a few various versions of the story. One of the versions is kind of interesting. Osiris made a beautiful chest and made it correspond to exactly the size of Osiris. And he said, anybody who's able to fit inside this chest exactly will be able to have it. So Osiris says, hey, that looks like it'll fit me. So he lays inside of the chest, and they quickly throw the lid over it, and they nail the lid on top of him, and then he gets thrown into the Nile. Not a very nice story, but there you have it. Okay, so now what will happen here is that the chest is then carried by the river and on its way out to sea through the Tannitic mouth, whereby the Egyptians, even to this day, call this mouth the hateful and excretable. This is a place where his body supposedly floated out. Now, there are a few other stories that are related to this. I don't have time to go through them all, but I want to mention one of Plutarch. Plutarch relates about this dark mouth when the Nile reaches its lowest level. He says, the story told of the shutting up of Osiris in the chest seems to mean nothing else than the vanishing and disappearing of water. Consequently, they say that the disappearance of Osiris occurred in the month of Athri, which is November, at the time when, owing to the complete cessation of the Etesian winds, the Nile recedes to its low level and the land becomes denuded. At the night, as the nights grow longer, the darkness increases and the potency of the light is abated and subdued. Then, among the gloomy rites that the priests perform, they shroud the gilded image of a cow with a black linen vestment and display her as a sign of mourning for the goddess, inasmuch as they regard both the cow and the earth as the image of Isis. This is kept up for 4 days consecutively, beginning with the 17th of the month. The things mourned for are 4 in number. First, the departure and recession of the Nile. Second, the complete extinction of the north winds as the south winds gain the upper hand. And third, the days growing shorter than the night. And to crown it all, the denudation of the earth together with the deforestation of trees and shrubs at this time. At the 19th day, they go down to the sea at nighttime, and the keepers of the robes and the priests bring forth a sacred chest containing a small golden coffer, into which they pour some potable water which they have taken up, and a great shout arises from the company for joy that Osiris is found. Then they knead some fertile soil with the water and mix in spices and incense of a very costly sort, and fashion therefrom a crescent-shaped figure, which they clothe and adorn, thus indicating that they regard these gods as the substance of earth and water. It's wonderful, this ritual being described. And so they're receiving back the body of Osiris, or he has been brought back. But of course, um, let's go to her reaction, obviously, of losing, first of all, her husband as this floating chest or coffin goes out to sea. Obviously, she's frantic. And at once she cuts off one of her tresses and puts on a garment of mourning in a place where the city still bears a name known as Copto, which of course means to strike or to cut off or to deprive. Next, Isis begins to search for Osiris, looking everywhere, but she comes to her wits' end. She just can't seem to find him. So, according as recorded uh, by Plutarch as well as Dia Chrysostom, but Isis wandered everywhere at her wits' end. No one whom she approached did she fail to address. And even when she met some little children, she asked them about the test. As it happened, they had seen it, and they told her the mouth of the river through which the friends of Typhon had launched the coffin into the sea. Wherefore, the Egyptians think that little children possess the power of prophecy, and they try to divine the future from the portents which they find in children's words, especially when children are playing about in holy places and crying out whatever chance to come into their minds. So you may not know this, but it's very interesting to know that the children do play a part when it comes to prophecy. You just get them focused on playing with toys, and whatever comes to their mind may say something important. Okay, so they're looking around and they can't find uh, him anywhere, and so the realization is that his body floated up the sea. And where does it go? It goes to Lebanon. It goes to the place known as Byblos, and it lands in the midst of a clump of heather. The heather, in a short time, grows around it and becomes a beautiful, massive stalk, and it's concealed then within its trunk. Now, the king of the country, Byblos, arrives, and he sees the very fine wood, and so he cuts this trunk, which has inside it the chest containing Osiris, and he puts it as a support for his palace. Well, Isis then arrives, sensing that Osiris is his body is a Byblos, and so she arrives, uh, and um, and so, but she's frustrated, and so what happens is that divine rumor kind of told her that he was here, and so but she is upset, and she sits there outside of a spring near the palace and not saying much of anything except welcoming the queen's maidservants, who she treated very nicely, and she plaited their hair and imparted her wondrous fragrance to their bodies. So here, women are getting their hair plaited, and they smell wonderfully. And so the queen observed her and wanted to know who the unknown woman was, and of course why she's doing these wonderful things. And so it happened that she sent for Isis to become to nurse her baby. They say the king's name was Malcander. The queen's name was sometimes known as Astarte, and of course, and so here you have it. You have the nursing of the baby, and what will happen basically is that she will supposedly nurse the baby, but what she really will be doing when the mom is not there is that she will be burning part of the baby in order to give this baby immortality. And much like the story that we hear of Demeter, the thing happens is that the mother walks in and sees her baby being burned and is so upset. And then Isis then reveals herself. And by the way, Isis at this point had been a bird circling around the pillar because she's figured out by this point where her husband body lays. And she demands that the body of her husband be returned to her. And that's exactly what happens. And so the body is returned. Okay. So we're going back to Egypt, right? So the body is brought back to Egypt. And it's interesting that we're thinking that this is going to be the end of it. And the most interesting part of the story takes place now. Okay. So what will happen is that the body of Osiris is brought back, supposedly to be revived, and she does have that magical power. But then Seth arises again and steals his body a second time and dismembers him, cutting the body of Osiris into 14 pieces and sprinkling his body parts all over Egypt. Okay, so this is pretty unfortunate. Now, the 14 parts are to be so ISIS now goes all over the place trying to collect the pieces of her husband. Now, the 14 parts may actually refer to an allegorical sense to the days of the waning of the moon, or the full moon to the new moon. So there may be a connection here. According to Diodorus Siculus, Seth divided the body of the slain man into 26 pieces. So there's variations of this. So very different stories, different versions of it. So Isis then goes about trying to retrieve the parts of her husband. And what she does is that every place that she finds a part or piece, she has a funeral there. And so each of those places becomes sacred to Osiris as well as Isis. So piece by piece. Well, she was able to find all the pieces except for his private regions. He couldn't find that. So, according to the story, she fashioned a phallus out of spices and wax. And this phallus then is placed upon Osiris. And of course, through this phallus, she becomes impregnated. And she becomes impregnated with Horus. Although Osiris technically is alive, and yet he's not alive, because he's going to be moving to the underworld and be king of that in that capacity. But it's still very interesting here. So now, well, now, as I said, all the parts are found except for that, but we're still have a problem with Seth. Seth is pretty upset. And so she is now running about and she's hiding Horus in the marshes, hiding him in thick papyrus plants. Soon Seth captures Isis and her son. Notice that Seth does not kill her. Thoth, the god of wisdom, comes to her aid, breaks her out of the house she was imprisoned in, and places her under the protection of 7 scorpions named Tephen, Pephin, Mistet, Misteftif, Mitet, Tetet, and Matet. These scorpions represent the 7 stars of the constellation known as Canis Major, in which the stars of Isis and Sothis were situated. While the scorpions were the protagonists here, because oftentimes the scorpions are connected to Isis, there was one that wasn't. And this scorpion bit Horus. It's so sad because Isis had to leave just for a few moments to find food for her son. And what happened is, at this point, the scorpion bites Horus. And as it is said, when I returned to embrace Horus, I found him the beautiful one of gold, a boy inert and helpless. He had bedewed the ground with water of his eyes and with the foam of his lips. His body was motionless, his heart was still, and his muscles moved not. And I sent forth a cry. Oh no, this is terrible. Nephthys now immediately came to her with Serket, the scorpion goddess, who both told Isis that she needed to appeal to a higher authority of all. Yes, right, needed to appeal to Ra himself. So suddenly there was a cry that arrived from Isis that has never been before or ever heard again, with such passion and anger and anguish. This distress cry rose into the heavens and reached Ra riding upon his sky barge. Ra was even caught by surprise, and immediately he was struck with compassion and sent down Thoth with the precise magic words to bring Horus back to life. There you have it. So there's a lot of works here in connection to this cry, sometimes known as a lamentation of Isis. And in fact, the women of Coptos walked barefoot upon scorpions during that time, and apparently did not get hurt in a ceremony dedicated to this great cry, right? In any case, Isis now declared that Horus was the next king over after her husband Osiris, but of course Seth contested this claim, and the gods deliberated for 8 years over the contesting claims. Eventually, she wins the day, and Horus is believed to be a worthy heir as well. But Isis did not kill Seth in most of the versions of the story, not annihilated. And the question is, why? And of course, Plutarch mentions Typhon was banished but not annihilated, for the goddess who holds sway over the earth would not permit a complete annihilation of the nature opposed to moisture, but relaxed and moderated it, being desirous that a temporary potency should persist, because it was not possible for a complete world to exist if the fiery element left it and disappeared. Even at the so basically, what happened is that Seth represents dryness, and of course Osiris represents moisture. But if you have too much moisture, you have flooding, right? You have too much dryness, you have desert. So the idea is Isis wants to make sure both are balanced, because if there's too much moisture, Egypt will be destroyed. In fact, they talk about the fact that there's one day years ago that a large portion of Egypt was underwater, and that the Nile River continued to build Egypt forward, and that Pharaoh's island was way out there, a day's trek by sea, and now it was connected to Alexandria through a land bridge. So the idea is this is true to a certain extent. The Nile River through the Nile Delta is extending the land of Egypt, and so she did not want to go back to the realm where much of Egypt is underwater. So fascinating story that has a little bit of history to it, a little bit. Okay, so there you have it. Okay, so now you can see that in many cases they seem to be mortal. This is going to change as time goes on. But I want to go into something that I know you're waiting for. Now I'm looking at my time, and here we go. And that is, I want to tell you the daily rituals within a temple of Isis. I thought that would be interesting for you guys to hear. I know our time is limited, but I want to make sure that I get to this topic. Very important. The daily rituals in the various temples of Isis, for example, in Philae, sometimes vary. So there's variants of it. But basically, it goes as follows. Ideally, the person who should be doing the head of the rituals should be Pharaoh himself. But Pharaoh can't be everywhere at one time. He can't be at all places at once. So what will happen is they'll have a priest who represents Pharaoh at the various temples located throughout Egypt and elsewhere. But these rituals are done, the ones I'm about to describe, are done every single day. So you're going to go and you're going to hear what a ritual is like. Okay, so first of all, the figure of Pharaoh, or I should say the Pharaoh priest, he will be represented by a deputy priest, a Pharaoh priest, who is dressed as Horus, with also representations connected to both Thoth and, interestingly enough, Seth, if it is in Lower Egypt. Naturally, in these temples, the iconography always shows Pharaoh in person doing these rituals. But here we go. First, at the break of day, at dawn, a procession went into the temple with the Pharaoh priest in attendance. So there we have the morning procession. Second, the Pharaoh priest was brought into a special room, which happens to be located in each temple of Isis, that is known as the House of Mourning. So every temple of dedicated to Egypt dedicated to Isis has House of Mourning. In fact, most temples in Egypt has this House of Mourning room. Here, the Pharaoh priest was purified by water that was drawn from a local sacred pool by a college of priests. And then he's handed ritual tools as he's dressed as Horus Thoth or Horus Set. And then everything about him, the tools and his outfit, are cleansed via magical words that are said around him. So magic words are uttered around him. Also, it's interesting that he is purified by natron. This is a key ingredient for mummifying mummies in Egypt. So this basically reveals, in a symbolic sense, that he was dying to become his underworld personage, right? So he is dying to be reborn. Third, he entered the temple, and then he ignites the fire, and then proceeds to charge a censer with charcoal and incense. Excuse me. So fourth, following the incense or fire ritual, the inner shrine containing Isis was then approached. That its door, of course, was closed the night before. The Pharaoh priest now ritually opens the doors, following the breaking of the various seals that were placed before it. The Pharaoh priest then fell before the image of Isis in worship while holding up an incense offering to please her, up in the air, usually above his head. An actual shrine intended to hold the goddess Isis was actually discovered at Philae, which is now housed in the Egyptian Sculptural Gallery. Excuse me. The emblem, here we go. The emblem of the twin caduceus with wings still frames the very top of the special ritual box. Number fifth, a hymn was next sung before her. Often this hymn was chanted. 6, an offering was given to Isis. Sometimes this offering was a honey or milk offering. And other times it was actually an image of Mot, who represents truth. The offering of Mot was very significant. Mot represented the divinely appointed ordered state of the land, which had been preserved by the well-meaning of the gods and goddesses. 7, yep, you got it. More incense is burned before Isis. 8, the image of Isis was respectfully and with great ritual removed from her shrine, with all her clothes and ornaments from the previous day then removed. Her image was then cleansed as much as possible by the Pharaoh priest, as well as others, without, of course, natron. She was purified with incense and sprinkled with holy water. New clothes were now placed upon Isis, along with new adornments. although her jewelry was most likely kept because it would get pretty expensive after a while of changing jewelry, uh, you know, uh, 365 days out of the year. So it was simply cleansed, right? Ninth, Isis was then returned to her shrine with all the dignity to be in charge or oversee the day's rituals. 10th, a great sacred feast followed, where Isis would magically consume various courses placed on the offering table before her. This food was also believed to be consecrated to her and filled with her holy power, right? So, that priests and worshipers were presented, uh, were present at this particular ritual, and they ate, participated in the food to be energized themselves. So this kind of reminds me of a lot of rituals that are done within Hinduism today and in the subcontinent of India in relation to both gods and goddesses. So you do have the, waking up of the god, the dressing of the god. I mean, the god being involved in various rituals, blessing the food, people taking the food, eating the food, taking in the magical power of Isis, right? And then, of course, putting the god to bed or goddess to bed. So, with this said, only the priest was permitted to enter the sacred sanctuary. The public had to stay outside. Some of the offerings did include milk. 11th, at the end of the day, a closing ritual was performed before the image of Isis, including offerings, incense, and chants. And then the doors of her shrine were sealed for the night. Finally, 12th, the priest swept away all the footprints that accumulated during the day, as well as cleaning the shrine in general before the temple was closed for the night, starting from the place where she is housed and going backwards into or back into the entrance area or exit. So during the course of the day, worshipers arrived at the outer sanctuary with their offerings and gifts that would be brought into the inner sanctuary by the priests. Often these votive offerings were in the form of statues that archaeologists constantly find today. The image of Isis was not always confined to the inner sanctuary, for on special occasions on her ritual calendar, Isis was paraded out of the temple in various processions uh, and feast days. So she got out every now and then. Now let's talk about the priesthood. I think we're here for this talk today because we want to hear details. Let's hear some details. The priesthood of Isis by the Middle Kingdom was divided amongst themselves in classes. At the very high position of high priest, this of course is theoretically, as I mentioned before, Pharaoh, the Pharaoh priest, who is declared as first prophet. Up until the New Kingdom, the precedent was that the local governor, called a nomarch, occupied this position, um, especially at the temple was an important one, making him both a local governor, a political and religious leader. If not the nomarch, the first prophet was typically another important civil functionary. This tradition continued, but changed during the New Kingdom, where the first prophet became primarily a religious post as opposed to a political post that was elected by the college of priests. Below the first prophet was his deputy, who acted as the assistant priest, either helping him with the sacrifices or performing them when he was unable. Below the high priest and his deputy were the college of priests, holding the rank of prophet, each one called the servant of the goddess. These are also known as the college of the prophets. And they below them were those deemed as the pure ones, called the weebs. These are the ordinary or common priests. We priests were organized into 4 shifts called philae, with each shift serving an entire month before standing down for 3 months. Return again on the 4th month again. During this period of time, they were expected to completely devoted day and night to rituals reserved for Isis. All the priests, by the way, were paid with their revenues drawn from a set percentage of the offerings to the temple, as well as sources of income related to the service of Isis. Yet, however, the income was not tax exempt, for they had to pay taxes like everyone else, with the exception of certain temples due to special occasions, due to certain immunities. The priests of Isis always wore linen outfits, and always the priests always shaved their heads, connected with purity, but also connected to mourning as well. When it came to their diets, the priests, of course, had a very strict diet during their times of service. Oh, by the way, I want to mention one more thing. This is really interesting, and that is that when it comes to the garments worn by the priests of Isis, as Plutarch notes, as for the robes, those of Isis are variegated in their colors, for her power is concerned with matter, which becomes everything and receives everything, light and darkness, day and night, fire, water, life and death, beginning and the end. In contrast, the robes of Osiris have no shade or color. They're just very light. So the robes are very, very colorful. Their diet, obviously, no mutton and no pork allowed. Um, and they're, for the most part, they abstain from fish. There's onions are no as well for them when it comes to their dietary habits. The Egyptians, when it comes to sacrifices, the Egyptians they will sacrifice bulls to Isis, but never cows. Cows are never sacrificed. And when a cow dies, you throw them in the river. If a bull dies, you actually bury them in the ground with their horns standing out. And when they're decayed a little bit, then what happens is that there's a special boat that collects them and exhumes them, and they're brought to an island known as Procyptus, where it is ritually buried. There you have it. These temples were believed to be full of power, of magic, and we do have a series of magic that is related to Isis. I have right here. I will, since we're heading towards the end, I will mention a few some magical spells. It's a good way to end. Here we go. Here is a protection spell. First, you must take sulfur and seed of Nile rushes, burn them as incense to the moon, and say as follows: I call on you, Lady Isis, whom Agathos Daemon permitted to rule in the entire Black Land. Your name is Lulululu, Barthalatar, Tharasibath, Author, Nekletish, Arthur, Batus, Achimo, Chemothi, Isis Sothis, Sore, Bubatis, Yorabata, Shamari, Nabutas, Ori, Io, Oe. Protect me, great and marvelous names of the God, for I am the one established in Pelisium, Serfoth, Moseros, Stromo, Molath, Molanter, Fontath. Protect me, great and marvelous names of the great God. And you add your name. So E, Nusuth, Lady Isis, Nemesis, Adrastia, many name, many form, glorify me as I have glorified the name of your son Horus. And then you add your name. So here you see this is a protection spell. This next one is a spell if you want to have a divine answer to a problem. You have to look to the east and say, you are the one who thunders, the one who rains and hurls lightning at the nighttime and dries in the same way. Come to me, reveal. And then, of course, you ask what you're wanting to be revealed. And then, of course, you prepare the ink, 3 dried figs, 3 stones, 3 fragments of wormwood, 3 lumps of myrrh, and you mix together, then pulverize them and write a formula. It goes as follows. Isis uttered it and wrote it when, after taking up Osiris, she fit together his separated members. Asclepius saw Osiris and admitted that he could not put together someone who was dead, even with the help of Hebe or anybody else. And so the idea is that, but nobody can do it, but Isis can do it. And of course, you then finally say, "Come to me, Sesu Gibaro Karasu Sabawath, for I conjure you," and it goes on. Some of these are quite lengthy. And the magic of Isis was permeated much of the ancient world. Of course, obviously, amulets of Isis were very important. That they were be hung around the neck, and in fact, they are known as around their neck. They're actually called the true voice of all things, and so this is to protect you. So the words of Isis protect you from all different kinds of harm. And yes, the Ankh, in addition, which is the symbol of life, is also connected with Isis, as well as the Tayet, which also looks very much like the Ankh, again connected with the ideas of life. What happens at the end of this is that Isis eventually is adopted during the Hellenistic age and starts to become very much a universal goddess that spreads throughout the Mediterranean. And Apulus in the Golden Ass talks about at length concerning this fictitious figure known as Lucius, who is turned into an ass. But in here, you have a nice description of Isis. And I do want to take a little time to read this before we close also. It says, firstly, okay, let's see, here it is. Slowly she rose till her whole body was in view, shaking herself free of the brine to stand before me, a radiant vision. If the poverty of human speech allows me, if the goddess herself grants me a wealth of verbal inspiration, I shall try to describe her marvelous beauty to you. Firstly, her long, thick hair, his tapering ringlets, was loosely spread over her divine neck and shoulders, and her head was crowned with a complex garland of interwoven flowers of every kind. At the center, over her brow, a flat disc like a mirror, or rather a moon symbol, shone with brilliant light. Coiled vipers reared from the right and left of her coronet. That was yeah, sorry about that. Coronet that was bristling with the erect ears of corn. Her multicolored robe was of finest linen, gleaming here pure white, here a saffron yellow, there a flaming red rose, with a woven border flowing with flowers and fruit. And what dazzled me most of all was her jet black cloak with its full sheen, wrapped gleaming about her, slung from the left shoulder, knotted at the breast, and sweeping over her right hip. It hung in sweetly undulated complex folds down to a tasseled fringe, and along its borders and over its surface fell a scatter of glittering stars, round a full moon at the center breathing fiery rays, and she bore a host of emblems. And who does she declare herself to be? She says, "Behold, Lucius, here I am, moved by your prayer. I, mother of all nature, mistress of the elements, firstborn of the ages, and greatest of power divine, queen of the dead, and queen of the immortals." And as we said, here we are where we began. She is known as Kibli, mother of the gods, and Etica, as well as the sea-girt Cyprus. I am the Papian Venus, Stygian Proserpine, as well as many others. She still has her final name ultimately as Isis. And in the end, they even had a mystery cult that was dedicated to her, which is worthy of a completely different thought. But I will just mention the fact that Lucius does become a member of these mysteries, initiate, and I will just touch on that for a split second because I do want to bring that up, even though I'm summarizing so many pages in a row. I will say this. He says, at once I set about acquiring those things myself and procuring them zealously. Uh, then the high priest, escorted by a band of devotees, led me to the nearest baths, saying the occasion required it. When I had bathed according to the custom, he asked favor of the gods and purified me by ritual cleansing, sprinkling me with water. Then in the early afternoon, he led me to the shrine again and placed me at the goddess's feet. He gave me certain orders too sacred for open utterance then, with all the company as witnesses, commanded me to curb my desire for food for 10 days following, to eat of no creature and drink no wine. I duly observed all this with reverence and restraint, and now came the evening, destined for my appearance before the goddess. The sun was setting, bringing twilight on, when suddenly a crowd flowed towards me to honor me with sundry gifts in accord with the ancient and sacred rite. All the uninitiated were ordered to depart. I was dressed in a new made robe of linen, and the high priest, taking me by the arm, led me into the sanctuary's innermost recesses. And now, diligent reader, you are no doubt keen to know what was said next and what was done. I tell you, if to tell you were allowed. If you were allowed to hear, then you might know. But ears and tongue would sin equally, the latter for its profane indiscretion, the former for their unbridled curiosity. Oh, I shall speak, since your desire to hear may be a matter of deep religious longing, and I would not torment you with further anguish, but I shall speak only of what can be revealed to the minds of the uninitiated with need for subsequent atonement, things which, though you have heard them, you may well not understand. So listen and believe in what is true. I reached the very gates of death and tread upon Persephone's threshold, yet passed through all the elements and returned. I have seen the sun at midnight shining brightly. I have entered the presence of the gods below, in the presence of the gods above, and I have paid due reverence before them. And when dawn came and the ceremony was complete, I emerged wearing 12 robes as a sign of consecration. Sacred dress indeed, though nothing stops me from speaking of it, since a host of people were there and saw me. As instructed, I stood on a wooden dais placed at the center of the holy shrine before the statue of the goddess, conspicuous in my fine, elaborately embroidered linen. The precious outer cloak hung from shoulder to ankle, so that I was wrapped around with creatures worked in various colors. And so he was dedicated to Isis. He was initiated and into the mysteries for which we still do not know. Thank you. There we go. Let's get a picture of everybody.
Oh, hold on.
You have cameras and things like that. You guys survived the rites
Right. Okay.
of Isis. So here we go. All right, 1, 2, and 3. Here we go. Whew. All right, you guys got a lot of information, I would say.
Yes. My goodness.
I mean, I think you know now a lot. I could have given more, but I figured, well, now you know what they did in the temple. You know the hierarchy of the priests, priestesses. You know the foods that they ate or didn't eat, I should say.
Mhm.
You know some of the rituals. You know some of the magic. You know some of the main legends. I think you understand how these ideas connect. But I'm open for questions. So any questions?
Oh, Dorian has one in the chat, it looks like.
Yeah, where's Bastet?
Yeah, during the trap to get Osiris in the box, where was Bastet when people were being challenged to sit in it?
I'm not actually. Okay, here's the funny thing is I'm not sure if I know, and also I'm not sure if it's funny or not because I'm picturing Bastet because Bastet is what the cat, right? The box. Sorry. So my mind is going places that it shouldn't be going. So maybe it's a lack of sleep. But it's like, hey, I want to get in there. Sorry. So let me go into the box. That's not for you. Maybe I'll join you in the box.
You
Yeah,
mean Schrodinger's box, right?
Schrodinger's basket.
That's
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, I honestly don't know. Yeah, that's a good question though, and I'm sure there is an answer out there. So, but my hubris is not high enough to do that. So, so I will not profane, and I will be good. So, any other questions?
Okay, so there's the burying the bulls with their horns sticking out of the dirt. They
Yes.
let them decompose.
Yeah.
And then they bring them back up and move them to an island. And then what is the symbolism? What is that? Why would they do that? That sounds kind of crazy.
Because well, of course, obviously, I can go here. So the bulls, this is an actual bull story without doing the bullying. Okay, so the bulls, cows are sacred. That's where they're thrown in the river. Bulls are looked as still sacred. They're still offerings, and they still have to be revered. And so they need to have special consecration. But the problem is you can't leave them. There's so many. You can't leave them being buried around everywhere because that's terrible. So you leave in the sense that their horns become the gravestone. And then they have these people that are hired to go about, well, they actually spend their whole lives doing it, collecting these bodies, exhuming them, and putting them into proper burial on basically a bull bone island that for some reason will later have a temple of Aphrodite on top. I don't know what that has to do with anything on it, but it was for that reason. But also, I want to mention that red bulls were sacred to Seth or Set, right? And so they were especially given to him as a offering, but that's because red bulls were oftentimes viewed as unlucky. Unfortunately, I have the sources here, but I don't want to go through it. They thought that the red hair was unlucky, and so what will happen is that in ancient times, the Greeks heard lots of stories where if there was a redhead, they would be sacrificed to Set because of the red hair. So there you have that. So as a result of that, the Greeks and Romans were not very flattered because many Greeks and Romans have red hair, believe it or not. And there were some superstitious Egyptians that were still around that would look at a redhead and go, "You're unlucky." And so you have that concept. So red bulls. So watch out when you have that red bull. Also, the other thing is that Greeks and Romans they ate cows, and so as a result, the Egyptians refused to touch anything that was touched by a Greek or a Roman who would eat cows, because that was considered also. So no, you don't eat cows. Cows give milk. Cows are revered, like you have in Hinduism, but you don't eat a cow. And so even if a very utensil or anything, somebody a Greek or Roman or anybody else who eats cows would touch, they would do some ritual purity because they didn't want to touch it. Probably too much information than you wanted. That's why I had to hold to my notes as much as possible because I can go too many places.
Okay. No, that was great. Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions?
I had a question about when a Isis was looking for Osiris and she was plaiting the women's hair and making them smell wonderful. Are there any details about what exactly they smelled like?
Ambrosia. Yeah, she gave the scent of the gods of heaven, the heavenly.
Oh,
Yeah, she gave that they smell just like heaven. She gave the, yeah, and cover them in some cases with a heaven-like raiment that came forth from her. So they just are coming glowing. These maidens, and the queen's back going, that'd be perfect for my son, you know. And and of course Isis fed her with her finger,
oh,
and then of course fed her the fire, started the baby the fire. However, there's some unfortunate stories too where you have trying to give the kid immortality, and then she does of course you have the whole revelation, and then she gets mad, uh, and the kid dies. I mean, there's like a mourning ritual that tied to the guy's name, and it's complicated, but yeah. So again, too much. Any other questions? Do you feel like you know Isis a little bit better as far as what she represents or how to understand her? I had to make sure that I outlined an understanding of Horus and Osiris, because otherwise she's not going to make any sense. And I've noticed, I'm glad this is being recorded, I've noticed a lot of people will just focus on Isis, but you got to know her context. You really do have to know her context, or it doesn't make any sense. And they'll see her and they'll worship her and they'll venerate her, or they'll see her as autonomous unto herself. But she, in Egyptian beliefs, is connected to these various roles. She is a mother. That's an important role. She is a wife. That's an important role that she holds. Yes, she is also independent, and she's a powerful, and she's beautiful, and she's brilliant. She's all those things. But I think sometimes we focus in on one part of her character, and we do not see her in the full capacity of what she is. And I think the ancients did her justice by seeing her as so multivariegated in so many ways, that she's able to hold all these roles and still not be diminished as a goddess. It's not beneath her to wail out in sorrow for the death of her son. To the sadness, extreme sadness. She can feel. She can be elated with joy. She can mourn. She is connected to emotion. She's not. And again, what I see a lot of times is they make Isis without emotion. The Egyptians are not emotionless people. They are full of emotion, and so their goddesses and gods are very passionate. I think in many ways it was the Greeks that really kind of took away from that, in a certain sense, intellectualized it. And but no, to see her as having feeling. And of course, Isis does connect to Artemis of the Ephesians, as we know, so, in a very direct way. So, because as we know, Egypt during the time of the Ptolemies actually owned what is now Western Asia Minor, Turkey, and owned Ephesus. And so the cult of Artemis of the Ephesians took on aspects of Isis, especially the nutrix, the nursing aspect in the personal sense. Isis was the one who was, in a sense, yes, she breastfed Horus, but she also, in a sense, breastfed the Egyptians, right? Through her magical power, through her potency, and the connection, of course, again, to Osiris. And same thing with Artemis of the Ephesians. She went from strictly an agricultural goddess, and still a mother goddess, to slowly, gradually, those hanging fruits eventually became breasts, And the Ephesians said they're the ones who breastfeed on Artemis and the Ephesians, but also the Ephesians say that they also Artemis breastfeeds us back. That goes the other way. It's a reciprocal, but there is a reciprocal relationship there. So, but yeah, and of course, I think it's important to understand that ISIS was a predominant cult or belief system in the Greco-Roman world, but a lot of her ideas and aspects, like Artemis of the Ephesians, does merge with Mary. So, Mother Mary. So, you do have a connection between ISIS and Mother Mary. So, again, the same idea, right? You know, who is the one who is the one who the nutrix, the one who breastfeeds? Yes.
So,
Any other questions?
yes, I have a question. Was Isis immortal as a goddess?
Great question. And in my notes, but let's go there. So you have ideas where she is, you know, the Greeks do this a lot, where gods were originally mortals that became immortals. So some Greeks will interpret that Osiris and Isis were just long-living ancestors, interpreting the Egyptian story. The Greeks are interpreting the Egyptian stories. They do that a lot with their own legends too. The Greeks like doing that. You know, originally, you know, all these are gods and goddesses were people. They went through this humanizing part in their evolution, and they were doing this with the Egyptian gods and goddesses. But still, at the same time, you have the story where Isis is buried at Philae, which is an island that is in Upper Egypt. It was considered sacred for a very long time, even into the Christian centuries. And they would say that she is buried here on Earth, along with Osiris supposedly being buried there. And they used to have a daily ritual where they surround the island with these bowls of milk. But at the same time, they believe that again, it's almost like a pharaonic idea, that they're still immortal, that their spirit goes on and becomes a god or a goddess. So their body is in a literal place, while their spirit has evolved. They move through the material realm to become a god or goddess. We see this in many other ancient belief systems, even Chinese, where mortals become divine ancestors or elementals or gods or goddesses. It's interesting. We kind of lose that later on, but yeah. So the answer to the question is yes. In fact, when they sprinkle the parts of Osiris all over the place, into 14 parts, into 26 parts, when they do that, there's a lot of versions of the story. So I'll go through this. So in some places, each of those pieces will have a separate funeral, and there'll be a separate ritual done to all those, and you do a pilgrimage and you visit all of them. That's one version of the story. The other version of the story is that Isis will know where the real body of Osiris is at, but she sends fake ones to the 14 or the 26 different locations, and only she knows which one has the body. Another version of the story. And then, of course, everybody is claiming, every one of those sacred sites are claiming, we actually have the body. And the other ones will say, no, we actually have the body of Osiris. Remember, Osiris then becomes the god of the underworld, the judge of the living and dead. And so it becomes a spiritual form. So you have this tethering of the physical body to the spiritual body that you have also in Egyptian religion between the mummy and the spirit, which you have with the people. First the pharaohs, then the common people, where the mummy is believed to be a physical aspect, but is like an anchor. Meanwhile, the Ba and Ka go on to the underworld and become one as the Ak, right?
Mhm.
And as a result of that, there's this tethering aspect to an actual placement, which seems to follow the idea that they think that they were living and they died and they went through the same process as people who are mummified and die and cross over to the other side. So you have almost this physicality aspect connected to gods and goddesses, especially when you go further back in time, when you have more of a three-story universe conception where gods, eat and drink and sleep and have lives just like us. And so that physicality aspect kind of crosses over. So you do have a literal death, for example, of Horus too, right? And she wails and cries, and he's revived. Does this make sense?
Yes, it does.
Yeah. So you do have this. So you have this mirroring of the human experience in Egyptian beliefs with the divine experience. But then, of course, the Greeks and Romans will go, oh, well, some Greeks and Romans will go, see, there were actually men and women. Other Greeks and Romans are, let's make it more mystical. They were always gods and they never had a body. And and then that gets infused during the Hellenistic era. And so by the
How
time
did
they
her,
get,
how did her physical body die?
so the physical body ceases life. How did Isis die?
Yes.
Yeah, according to the stories, she led a life of a certain amount of days, and she actually expired. And they'll give like a whole bunch of numbers of how many, of course, like Methuselah, goes on for such a long period of time. And in some cases, they'll say it's been 20 centuries, since this, or they'll give like these long, and you have this in so many other mythologies from ancient times where these godlike men live these extremely long lives, and they walk the earth. You're going to see this even in Zoroastrianism too. You're going to see this and others. Of course, when you get to the Old Testament or Hebrew Bible, you have the long lives without having the sacredness, except for Lot. Lot, who walked, was righteous, and who was not, and he was taken up to God. And then all of a sudden, sometimes he becomes a divine-like figure, even in the apocryphal or Jewish literature, right? So that's interesting too. It's like, well, wait, what happened? He's like angelic. He got elevated. So even there, even in Jewish beliefs, you have this sense of mortal humanity becoming more elevated. He's Elijah, not so much, but he becomes messianic and he goes up in a fiery chariot. But he's still messianic. He's supposed to come back someday, and according to many Jewish beliefs. I'm not making sense. So you have
Yes,
this.
you are.
You have this. These ideals, but they're conflicting. So you'll ask one Greek who's interpreting Egyptian beliefs, they'll say they're all were men at one time and women, and they lived and they breathed just like our gods and goddesses, and then they became, like the heroes, they became elevated. Others who are more metaphysical type will go, no, that was a misconception of humanity. They made a mistake. They weren't physical at all. They were divine from the beginning, and they came to Earth in human form. And then when they died, they left the husk behind.
One more question. Most of my readings have said that Isis resurrected Osiris.
Yes, let's go here. So he was resurrected, but resurrected in the underworld in spirit form.
Okay.
So what happens is, unfortunately, he is like almost reminds me of a Shiva and Kali, but he is like this dead body with this magical phallus. And she mounts the magical phallus and she becomes impregnated with Horus. He doesn't seem very lively. so I mean, something is a lie. I guess you're
I've
correct.
had dates like that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
I wasn't gonna say nothing.
Something was resurrected. It wasn't his whole body,
Okay.
or just partly. And then of course he is resurrected in the sense where he goes into the ground, he goes into the underworld. But see, as a plant deity who's connected with the fecundity of the soil, the moisture of the soil, that's where he should go. So when the next cycle arrives, again, you have the combination between him and the energy of Isis, next inundation of the Nile. So in a sense, that story is a seasonal story, and they celebrate it every year. They're going through it.
Thank you for answering my questions.
Absolutely, I love the questions. Fantastic questions. Yeah. Any other questions? Is this fun? Right?
Jamie, you have any questions?
I was just curious as to where the spells he quoted came from.
Oh,
whether they're
wonderful.
historical.
Yeah. Okay, so I have. I don't know, check over here. Okay. Well, I haven't memorized it. Okay, so write this down. BETZ. Bets.
Okay.
Greek magical papyri is one.
Got it.
Get that,
Thank you.
you'll be happy. It's actually a spell book that's really thick. It goes through all these different spells. Also, you'll find Isis mentioned, of all things, Marvin Meyer's Coptic Egyptian magic, which is because again, Isis will combine with Christianity. So, yeah, you'll also find spells in other spell books too. You can actually buy a few online. Mhm. Any other questions? Yeah. But the one for protection that was from that.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. All right.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Welcome. Well, thank you so much for being here. And I think I covered the topic. A lot of materials.
A lot of material.
A lot of materials. But I think this is what you're wanting, right? And you know a lot about Artemis of the Ephesians now from 2 weeks ago. So you're gonna be experts. You'll be almost able to recreate almost everything, right? Except for the mysteries, which we don't know right at the end, right? We don't know those. So thank you so much, Dorian, for being here. Happy Thanksgiving to you. And many blessings.
Happy Thanksgiving to you too.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving, everybody.
Thanksgiving.